Welcome to the Wine Access Author Series. I'm Vanessa Conlin, Master of Wine and Head of Wine for Wine Access. And it is a real thrill and honor to be here today with Natalie MacLean, author of two books we're going to discuss, but also a podcast host and multi-talented wine professional. Just a little background on Natalie. She was named the world's best drinks writer at the World Food Media Awards and has won 4 James Beard Foundation Journalism Awards. Wow, very impressive. She is the only person to have won both the MFK Fisher Distinguished Writing Award from the James Beard Foundation and the MFK Fisher Award for Excellence in Culinary Writing from Les Dames d'Escoffier International. Natalie studied the Romantic Poets at Oxford University with Jonathan Wordsworth. She graduated with honors from the Masters of Business Administration at the University of Western Ontario. Welcome, Natalie. Thank you so much for being here.
Vanessa, it's great to be back with you.
Thank you. Well, let's sort of start at the very beginning about getting into not just wine, but getting into writing about wine. What made you think I really need to write a book?
What made me think? I think it was a sleep-deprived state. I started writing when I went on maternity leave because, of course, we can't have any downtime for our brains. Vanessa, I know you know that as a study nerd yourself.
Yes.
But I thought, motherhood is pretty full-time. But I yearned to, as I say, keep my brain alive. And I had been working in high tech for a supercomputer company based in California. And so I'd started making all my visits up to Napa Valley and Sonoma on the weekends, developed a passion for wine, took a diploma program as a sommelier, didn't work though as one and didn't think of writing about it. But then I thought, okay, I'm home here. I can write about wine on the internet. So I pitched a local magazine about that topic. And they said, sure, you've been published before. And I'm thinking, yes, in my high school newspaper, don't ask me for samples. And they took that led to a full-time column. And that gave me the confidence to approach other publications. And so fast forward, I started entering writing competitions and so on, as you mentioned, because I've always been competitive, shall we say. I was a dancer, Highland dancer, Scottish dancer, so it was Highland Games. So competition's in my blood. If I sniff a competition, I'm there. Anyway, it keeps me on my toes, literally. So after winning a couple of those, an editor from Penguin emailed me and said, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I thought, no, but that sounds interesting. And so that sort of got me on the journey. I sort of backed up from that initial contact, got an agent, then went to publishers. And that's kind of to answer your question, how the book came about, the first one.
And the first book, I think, Red, White, and Drunk All Over was 2006.
That's right. Yes.
It covers quite a broad range of topics. I mean, it's the history of Burgundy to bottle service as a sommelier. I mean, there's a lot of content in here. So how did you decide what stayed in the book and how much great stuff actually ended up on the cutting room floor, as they say?
Well, I guess it was so wide ranging because I was I'll always think of myself, Vanessa, as an enthusiastic amateur. I'm always learning. And I always remember my initial anxiety about wine. I didn't come from a family who loved wine, East Coast, Nova Scotia, Scottish, beer, whiskey. So we thought wine was really just for fancy people. And that was not my history. So I always keep that in mind when I'm writing, but also when I'm learning. And that's lifelong, as you know yourself. Mm-hmm. So I cover this broad swath of topics because I'm really just searching for others who share my passion for wine. So for their stories. So that's why I didn't and will never write the complete history of Burgundy, because there's a place and a person to do that and for that. But for me, it's about who can I find that's really passionate about wine? Let's learn about their story. And through their story, let's learn about wine that way, sort of the other way around. I used to say, my mother used to put the peas in the mashed potatoes because I love mashed potatoes, but I did not like vegetables. So the stories are like the mashed potatoes, but I hope I've hidden in the mashed potatoes some wine education, whether it's learning about the kind of glassware you should use or food pairings and so on.
So I have a question about, well, it's partly selfishly motivated because there's some pretty amazing experiences that you have in this book that I'd like to know how you were able to have some of these opportunities. Like, I believe you were hosted by Aubert de Villaine at Domaine Romani Conti, and this is writing your first book. So how did that happen, and how can I use that experience for myself?
Oh, I'll put you in touch. No problem. Just kidding. I was once, Vanessa, at a book reading for Red, White, and Drunk All Over, and they said, well, how did you get in there? And I said, it actually wasn't me. It was you, in that my readers. It's not, it never is. And this is, again, sort of keeping perspective. It's never, what am I doing? It's who do I represent? Who do I bring with me when I go to talk to Aubert de Villaine? And that's all the readers who can't get into his tasting room because he can't accommodate. I mean, it's, as you know, prestigious, one of the world's best Burgundies. And they don't even have an open tasting room. But he said, yes, come talk to me, because of the wine lovers and readers I brought with me, or I represented. So, reaching out to him or via a long chain of people I can't even remember. And I was surprised he even said yes, but he did. He was so gracious. But I think, the yes was not yes to me, but yes to a lot of wine lovers who came with me.
Well, and I think you had some other pretty incredible experiences, like interviewing Robert Parker and Jancis Robinson about Bordeaux, I believe.
Yes.
And their various takes. So tell me about those phone calls or those emails. How did that happen?
Well, thank God they were phone calls. They couldn't see me just sweating and turning beet red as I do whenever I'm excited. So they were really interesting calls because, of course, famous American critic Robert Parker really popularized the 100-point score, as you know. Jancis Robinson is kind of the queen of wine writing, author of the Oxford Companion of Wine. They have such different sensibilities. And what I was writing about is they really clashed big time over this one Bordeaux wine. Robert Parker loved it. She hated it. Anyway, he said, she said. But really, the point of it was just this clash of cultures and taste in wine. And I was intrigued by that. I loved it. And as a Canadian, we're always apologizing and we're always trying to stay somewhere in the middle. So I consider myself a kind of mid-transatlantic kind of girl for diplomatic reasons. But I do love the sort of the refinement and there's something about the British sensibility on the one hand, because I don't know who it was, but it's got to be a Brit who said, wine is one of the elegant extras of life. And, they wouldn't rate it any more than they would rate their lovers. And then on the other side, you have Robert Parker, who is really a consumer advocate, who says, hey, people don't want to spend more time choosing wine than they do, a lot of them, choosing toothpaste. So give them something they understand, a score, because we know that. And at first I resisted, but then I came over to his way of thinking, because that's the way I feel even today I can be of greatest service. And that's why I do rate score wines, in addition to those, I hope, elegant extra tasting notes.
And how would you recommend if someone is trying to figure out which critic to align with or who to listen to? How should a consumer make that decision?
I think it's finding someone whose palate lines up with yours, but also someone who can guide you a little bit further, take you out of your comfort zone. So it can be, I think it comes down to palate taste, but it can also be a preference for personality. You like the way they write about wine, or they make it interesting or fun. There's just so much out there these days with the internet and social media and videos and everything else. I think there's a critic for everyone. And I think these days everyone is a critic, but there's so many ways to be guided. I think that's an easy choice these days.
So throughout both books, and I mentioned from 2006, Red, White, and Drunk All Over, and then I believe 2011, you followed with Unquenchable. But throughout both, you have a very sort of conversational, accessible tone of voice. Is that something that comes naturally, or is that something that you had to study?
No, that's just the way I talk. I come from Nova Scotia, as I mentioned, small town where if you put on any airs, you were labeled uppity. So no one was getting fancy back there. And you just, I still believe, say it like it is, say what you feel, be open, be vulnerable, admit when you don't know things. And I think people relate to that much more than cold, hard perfection or the expert who is way up here. As I say, someone else said this, but I consider myself a guide on the side, not a sage on the stage. I want to be with someone like their best friend at the kitchen table, right? And talking over a glass of wine. And again, I go back to my own anxieties, which were many. They were locally grown and 100% sustainable over my lifetime. I'll always remember just being so uptight about wine and thinking, I can't do this. I mean, they're going to know I don't come from this world. And yet here I was plunked down in the middle of it, or I put myself there. But then being fascinated by it and just letting myself go with that curiosity and that passion.
Yeah. So you went undercover in both retail and as a sommelier in the book. So which was more difficult?
I think they both tapped into different types of anxiety. This is going to be a therapy session. You didn't know it, but so I think that working in a wine store was a marathon. And working as a sommelier was more of a sprint. And what I mean by that is that the long days that I spent in a couple of wine stores in New York and San Francisco really were a test of stamina and staying power and trying to answer questions and so on. But the sommelier really, for me, was moments of high peak performance when you were tableside trying to still answer questions, but pour wine and get it all together, especially if there was a group of people. And that appealed to me more, I think, because I was a Highland dancer, a Scottish dancer, and being those sort of peak performances, and then you get to rest and like regroup is my kind of, I don't know, test or whatever.
And were there any, particularly humorous or excruciating moments in either retail or working in the restaurant that you still remember?
So many. I wore inappropriate footwear in the wine store. I mean, don't wear heels when you're working a 12-hour day, as you know, Vanessa, you've had experience with that. But I think being a sommelier brought out the most memorable moments because I do remember this. I mean, I had some great ones, but this one woman stood out. She was so perfectly coiffed, and I was there. They'd chosen an expensive bottle. I decided to work at this 4-diamond restaurant, and I don't know why, but just let's up the ante. And it was such an expensive, it was California wine. And I dribbled a little bit of red wine on the white tablecloth, and she just looked at it and didn't even look at me. And I said, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry. And she just kept talking to her girlfriend. And I thought, and I was just mortified. But what was worse was she wouldn't even acknowledge anything had happened. And I felt what it would be like to be dismissed, like to not even be considered. And I think that really drove home for me the difference between service and servility, I guess. And that, it's a tough job. It's the secret, whatever, you don't see how much work is going on behind the scenes. And I can't even do it properly as a sommelier, because this was just for writing purposes. But and then just to be like, okay, off you go kind of thing was just, it
Yeah.
really drove it home. It made me a better restaurant diner for sure.
Oh, I think everyone should have to work in restaurants at some point,
Yes,
some capacity.
I agree.
So you've traveled extensively, but is there a region that you haven't that maybe you'd like to go and do some research for an upcoming book?
Well, yes and no. The yes is there are lots of regions that I haven't been to that I'd love to go. One big missing gap in my repertoire is Spain. Been to Portugal, been to lots of European countries, but Spain, and just to have some tapas and sherry and I don't know, go to Barcelona. I've heard that's such a beautiful city. I'd love to go there. My third book, though, will be more memoir and less travelogue into different regions of wine. And so it's still got, wine is still going to be the main central theme of it, but it's more of a behind the scenes or underground, if you will, of the glossy world of wine and what goes on there.
And in addition to travel, you've of course interviewed some pretty incredible people. I've mentioned, of course, Robert Parker, Jancis Robinson, Aubert de Villaine. But of all the many people that you've interviewed, was there a favorite subject?
I think so. And I think many people might be familiar with Randall Graham of Bonnie Doon in California. I mean, he is zany. I mean, he's hosted a funeral for Cork in Grand Central Station, New York, right? You've probably heard some of these stories, Vanessa, but he had an open cask funeral and he filled it with corks and he mourned the death. He had a full, Jancis Robinson was there. They had a full funeral service for cork because he hates cork because it can impact wine, as you know, it can give it cork taint. But he'll do these crazy things, but he's making a really serious point or really important point. And, you know, he's done all kinds of things. He's had an asteroid named after him, and he's the Lone Ranger, and he's dressed in purple spandex for the cover of Wine Spectator magazine, and it goes on and on. But when you talk to him, you realize that behind all of that craziness is a lot of wisdom, a lot of kindness, and a lot that I think we can learn about wine. It's just, he has a way of putting it out there that draws attention in a great way. It makes us laugh. And I think we need to laugh. We need to be entertained before we can be educated. People are not going to stay with you if you can't keep them enraptured with a story or a joke or something that draws them in.
So I couldn't agree more, by the way, but staying on the subject of interviewing people, are there any interviews that you can recall where you left and thought, oh gosh, I wish I had asked this question?
Oh, that's a good question, actually. Going meta here. You know, I'm not sure if there was a question I left out. Just sometimes I've been to a region where I felt I didn't have enough time with the person because there was a certain schedule to keep up. And I think some of the best conversations you have are after you've hung out with the winemaker for a long time, like hours and hours, if not a day or two or longer, and they've let down their guard and, you know, their PR person has gone for the day and you get some off script, you know, free range kind of comments. And so, you know, that's why I've always resisted going on a lot of media tours. It's not an uppity thing. It's I just can't get a great story if we're moving from winery to winery every half hour or hour, because for me, it is the stories that will tell you about the wine rather than just tasting the wine and telling you about it. So I guess that would be my long-winded answer to that.
That's great. So in your second book, Unquenchable, you highlight some lesser known but very high quality regions, but this was published in 2011. And some of these regions now, I guess you were right, have become quite popular. These regions are styles of Provence Rosé, Mendoza, Argentina. Do you have any plans on a follow-up to highlight what those regions would be today in 2021?
Well, I think book three will be more memoir. There'll be a lot of great bargain wines in there because I am a wine cheapskate at heart. I always love finding the wines that taste twice as expensive as they cost. And my tip for that, by the way, is go south. So often you get premium, beautiful luxury wines, say in Napa or Sonoma, but go south to Paso Robles. Same with Tuscany, Piedmont, go south to Sicily. Bordeaux, Burgundy, go south to, the south of France, Languedoc.
Yeah.
But the memoir itself, although it will have lots of inexpensive wines, will be more about life in the wine world, like behind the scenes and as someone who is in the industry, as a woman who is a writer, that sort of thing. It's more that, not a tell-all, but a tell you something kind of thing, but with lots of wines.
Got it. Well, I'll look forward to reading that.
Thank you.
Something that you write a lot about, also particularly in your second book, is food and wine pairing. Mm-hmm. So where did you learn this and what made you so passionate about writing about that?
I think food and wine pairing is the most fun I have with wine. And I think for those who are new to wine, it's the best way to bring them in addition to storytelling, of course. But most people are not as intimidated with food as they are with wine. So, that roast chicken doesn't come with a vintage chart. It's just not as complex. We don't get as uptight about food. Yes, I can pick my head of lettuce. I can pick my asparagus, but give me a wall of Bordeaux. It's like, oh no. So I think if we can bring more people into wine through food and wine pairing, that's a great thing. Plus, I think we can have so much more pleasure with wine when we pair it with food. I think there are some flavor combinations, some magic that happens in your mouth that just does not happen with wine alone. And the third reason is that we can satiate out of wine just like anything else if we just go to the wine. Like that's why that combination of like champagne and potato chips is so smart, right? You don't get tired of the chips, you don't get tired of the bubbly, you just keep going back and forth, and you finish the bag, you finish the bottle with someone else, of course.
So what do you think is the most difficult food to pair with wine?
I think the problem children of the wine world, or the food world, I should say, are asparagus and artichoke. And, they have that natural compound called cynarin. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this cynarin, but it makes everything taste sweeter as a result. So if you have asparagus or artichoke, and then you go to a bone dry wine, it's going to taste sweeter. So that can really wreak havoc on a lot of wines. Especially if that's not the style of wine that you want to drink, something that tastes much sweeter than it is. So for those foods, I usually recommend, a nice crisp Sauvignon Blanc. It's not going to taste sweet, but it's not going to taste as austere as it might on its own. Again, the two are interplaying and making each other better, like any good relationship.
Like any good relationship. And do you have a recommendation, a wine that you think is sort of very universally easy to pair with many different types of food, where it's sort of a don't worry about it wine?
Yes. Rosé, dry rosé just goes with everything. To me, it's a hedonist dream because it has good dry rosé has all of the flavor and interest of a great red wine, but none of the heavy alcohol or tannin or oak. Like I love dry rosé from Provence, or even the Rhone Valley, Tavel. Those are amazing. And then it's got this acidity, this juicy acidity that just cuts like a silver knife through anything rich or fatty, like a creamy cheese. But it can go both ways. It can handle so many different foods.
Yeah, completely agree. That and champagne.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we don't need to rule one out. It's not a this or that. It's both, please.
Right. Exactly. So on any given night, you're just home, put your slippers on and don't want to, spend too much thinking of it, but really want to drink something delicious. What's your go-to bottle?
I keep trying to come up with a new go-to, but I just keep going back to the comfort. It's like favorite pair of jeans or pajamas, but it's Pinot Noir. And I know it's many people's favorite, but I just love Pinot, especially, when it's colder. It's just so lovely and luscious, like satin pillows on your mouth. But not heavy, or alcoholic or tannic generally, because I like cool climate Pinot, whether it's from Carneros or from Niagara or from Burgundy, if somebody else is buying it. I think Pinot is just a lovely, lovely, relax all evening kind of wine.
Yeah. And is there one myth about wine that you wish you could dispel?
We talked about this, Vanessa, when I interviewed you on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. And that is that you have to be an expert before you can enjoy it. And I don't think you do. I think you can jump right in. I think you know your own palate. And at the same time, I think you can become more informed and enjoy it even more. But I think some people hesitate and just default to that same bottle over and over because it's safe. They know they like it. And while there's nothing wrong with that, there's such a wide world of diversity of taste with wine that you got to explore. I also compare it to dance because I trained as a Highland dancer. Yes. So, anyone can go and watch the Highland Games or a ballet and say, oh, look at the dancers. Aren't they nice? Like, oh, look, they've got nice pointy toes. But as someone who trained in Highland dancing, when they're dancing over the swords, I have a muscular response and I'm holding my breath, they don't kick the swords. So I think that range is there for everyone. Right. Sure, just go and enjoy a glass of wine and leave it at that. That's fine if that's what you want. But you can also take it up a level if you want to dig in even deeper.
Well, thank you so much, Natalie. This has been such a pleasure. The time has flown by, but I'd love for you to let everyone know where they might find you, whether that's to purchase one of your fascinating books or to follow you on social media or to listen to the podcast. How can we do that?
Thank you, Vanessa. This has been terrific. I've so enjoyed our time chatting. So they can find me on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast, wherever they listen to podcasts. NatalieMacLean.com, my website, is where you'll find just about everything, including a link to the podcast. I teach online wine and food pairing courses. That's mainly what I do these days while trying to finish that third book. And also for your viewers, listeners, I am offering a free food and wine pairing guide. And you can find that at NatalieMacLean.com/wine access. And so everyone can get that. And then 2 people that I'll choose randomly will also get signed copies of my books.
Oh, that's very generous. And
my pleasure.
Highly recommend them. I read them both.
Thank you.
So wonderful. Well, thank you again so much for joining us, Natalie. Thanks for everyone watching at home, the Wine Access Author Series, and we hope to see you back here soon. So with that, cheers.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. This has been terrific.